too.
No problem. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right, I am a substitution. I'm afraid the guy who was originally supposed to be here, unfortunately, can't make it. So you get me and you get a repeat. Has anybody seen this talk of mine before? Most of you haven't. If you have any questions about it, or want to make it a little different, just ask me questions as we go through. If we run out of time, all the stuff that I don't get to is on my website. Matter of fact, if you go for a little more outdated version I did back in 2009, it's actually like a 3-hour class I did on this, with a lot more demos. But occult computing and anti-forensics. First of all, my name is Adrian Crenshaw, and I'm at Irongeek.com. I have interest in InfoSec education. Don't know everything, just geeky time in my hands. I'm a regular on ISD podcast, usually Thursdays, so they're podcasting anywhere between 5 and 6 times a week. Good for your daily commute. Also, I'm a co-founder of DerbyCon, and I don't have it in that previous slide, but I'm also a senior security engineer at a Fortune 1000 company. That is a fairly new event, so that's why it's not in that particular slide. All right, there's a much longer version of this talk out there already. If you want these slides, I can give them to you, or you can check out the ones I uploaded for AID, because this is pretty much a rehash of, these should be the exact same slides as I used at AID like a month or two back. For those who want to leave early and are worried about hiding their data and keeping it secure from people who might grab another machine later on, first of all, maintain physical access to your computer. Use full hard drive encryption, not this, I just want to encrypt this one little file, using PGP or whatever, and keep things separated. Like keep the stuff you want to keep private from the stuff you care more about, so that if you have to wipe something, you only have to wipe one thing and don't have to worry about moving this data or that data, or let's say you're web browsing on a certain web browser, but you're also using it for other things you don't want people to know about. So there's like mixtures of what history's in what. That becomes kind of important if you're using things like Tor and I2P, which well, most of you know who Tor is, right? I might cover I2P a little bit later. But one of the things is keeping it separate from the standpoint of if you need to wipe the history on something, or if you need to, if you're using your Tor browser bundle for both normal Tor traffic, but also for doing your day-to-day business, sometimes things cross over. Your identity kind of cross over, and you have things in two places that you wouldn't necessarily want, but we'll hopefully get a little into that later on in the slides. Now you might wonder why I use the term occult computing, because directly forensics has to do with science and law, and not everybody you want to hide stuff from is necessarily law. Matter of fact, you shouldn't be hiding things from the law, because that's wrong. Anyway, we're going to continue on. So since forensics is related to science and technology and investigation, establishment of fact or evidence in a court of law, and sometimes you just want to hide something from someone too snoopy. No, not the comic character, the comic character. Anyway, since hiding activities is what we were doing, occult seems like a good term. Occult meaning hidden. So call it occult computing, photography. Let's continue on. Alright, so why would you be interested in this kind of material? It's not necessarily about hiding your stash in the fuzz, as I was alluding to earlier. There's a lot of law and policy enforcement may find useful in these kind of talks, like how does someone normally hide stuff? Where should I look besides just normal places? Like, let's look at my docs and see what he has. Where else might he have stuff? What might he be doing to hide stuff? What might he be using to wipe data or encrypt it? Kind of useful knowledge for one of those types of people. Users may also want to know how to hide their activities from invasive law or policy enforcement. And companies may want to know how to clear their boxes before donating them. There's all sorts of reasons for being curious about this sort of information. Now, most of them will be talking about Windows tools here, but a lot of the core concepts will be applicable in other operating systems. Also, I'm not going to cover malware analysis. Sometimes anti-forensics plays into that, like you want to make, you use various technologies so it's not easy to reverse engineer your malware. Anti-forensics plays into that, but that's not what we'll be covering in this talk. Now, I'm also not going to be talking much about network anti-forensics, hiding stuff in the network, data exfiltration via stealthy means, or even really Tor I2P beyond just light mentions. Mostly we're going to be talking about covering your tracks on stored media. Now, I put things into 4 categories of anti-forensics techniques. One is don't leave the tracks in the first place, don't leave the record. 2 is selective file removal and encryption tools. 3 is politricks, neat ideas that people have but don't necessarily work, but they're kind of interesting to talk about. And finally, nuke it from orbit is the only way to be sure. That falls into the category of completely wiping the drive or having complete hard drive encryption. Though, of course, there's ways around almost everything. If we really want it to be secure, go ahead and do a single wipe down the drive and then take it out and shoot it. I mean, yes, people say, I remember I once told oh man, I posted a video once and I said bed and gutman wipe, and it was me and a bunch of my buddies going out to a shooting range and unloading on a bunch of gear, including hard drives. And so we had like a 3.6, an AK-47, it was like an M1 Grand Cruiser 3.86, a shotgun. We obliterated this stuff. And so I called the video bed and gutman wipe. And someone said, well, technically, someone could get the shards of the disk and then try to extract the data. If anybody you know has the money and the desire to do that, I mean, if someone wants to spend that kind of money to recover your data, they're going to come after you via other means. And, if anybody short of Osama bin Laden, I don't see people spending that money it would take to repair that data. And even then, to get shards. But regardless, let's continue on. If it's not easy, by the way, as far as anti-forensics, most folks aren't going to do it, at least not do it reliably. And if it's not secure, there's no point in doing it. So there's various techniques people use that I just pretty much throw out. This is my Venn diagram of doom, as far as why I like categorize things. Those things are comprehensive, secure, and convenient. Very few things, I suppose. Notice things that are weak, like for instance, deleting a file, just a file, very weak. Throw that into one category, but it's very convenient. 2, selective file wiping. I'll put it into some kind of secure and convenient, not comprehensive at all, and I'll go into why here shortly. Full drive wiping and encryption. That goes into 3, though there are all ways against someone's password. There are all things like cold boot attack and other things I'll go into. But generally pretty good. Then there's 4 technical and weak hidden partitions and 5 stego. That's secure and technical. I'm not sure whether it's comprehensive. It's more about hiding your data from people even knowing to look for it in the first place. All right, background and stuff. Useful info to know, things to search for later on. The Julia Merrill case. Anybody heard of this lady? She was a school teacher, and so she got hit charges for. By the way, I think lawyers are generally scum. Well, actually, except for the lawyers that are in this room, I love you guys. You're okay. But they decided to come after this woman. She's a teacher, and she didn't know anything about technology, and they had a Windows 98 box. I think it was in the early 2000s. No antivirus, I recall, not really up to patched, and she hit a website, or she already had malware on it, and she opened it up. And she got a porn storm. You remember porn storms from the late 90s, early 2000s? They don't see them as much anymore. All over the place. She didn't know what to do, and she didn't know to plug and plug the computer because she was afraid she would damage it. So a bunch of the kids in the room were there, and they saw it. And somehow she got charged with child endangerment. And even after it became clear that she didn't intentionally show this stuff, they still kept coming after her. So she's a very sad case in having to deal with the law enforcement and bureaucracies that really don't care beyond covering their own bastards. All right, continuing on, Sebastian Boscher. Now this guy did do some stuff wrong as far as I can tell, but it brings up, how do you persuade? Sometimes laws even protect people we don't necessarily agree with what they do. If you heard the case of the guy who came across the Canadian border and they found contraband, in this case I believe it was child pornography or suspected child pornography on the hard drive, and then they closed the laptop down, it was fully hard drive encrypted, and they had to compel the guy to use his password. That is one of these cases. And I'm trying to remember how they wiggled through this. I think in the end they compelled him to use his password because they claimed that, okay, it doesn't infringe on your Fifth Amendment rights because we're not using your entering the password to prove that you own the laptop, merely to get to the data on it. There's some fine nuanced argument like that. So they claimed it wasn't an infringement on his Fifth Amendment rights. Generally, my understanding of the law finds that if it's a physical item and that can be subpoenaed, but if it's a product of the mind only, that it can't, you have to talk to a lawyer to get more information on this. So it's an interesting case to read up on if you're curious on the whole, can the law make someone surrender a password? So that's a bit of case law to look at. In fact, we haven't looked at it in a couple of years, so I'm not sure how it actually came down. There's probably better case law at this point. Oh, the hacker's defense. This is a really interesting concept. Have you heard someone using defense that I didn't download that file or install it there? Some hacker must have hacked my machine and done it, or a piece of malware did that. And actually, it's a lot of times that's probably a really legitimate. You hear all the time of cases where someone's next door neighbor was using their Wi-Fi to download something they shouldn't have. Well, people can use the hacker defense, though most of the people in this room probably couldn't pull off the hacker defense and have to leave it. So you're saying you're unsecured Wi-Fi, someone else came by and did it, and you were the one that did this. Aren't you the place to know you should have encrypted it and done this? You should have. Some people that excuse probably work better than others. Also, I'm really curious from the law standpoint of if a system is set to wipe data at normal intervals and it's part of normal routine tasks, is that considered spoliation of evidence? Like, in what cases can you wipe data? How long do you have to keep it? I mean, if you know that there's a legal case that's about to happen, you delete it. That's instant destruction of evidence. But let's say you have a process in your home machine that automatically wipe every free space every night at 1 a.m. Is that technically legal if you document that you always do that? Then again, the question comes up, why are you doing that? And these are questions I don't really have a good answer for. But spoliation is basically screwing up of evidence. By the way, if a court charges you with spoliation of evidence, so spoliation of that evidence, generally what ends up happening is saying, okay, court assumed that the stuff that these other people claiming was there was actually there, because this guy destroyed what evidence was left. So that's not really an adverse ruling, I think it's also called. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer. Last I checked, I have a soul if such a thing exists. You're getting a theme here. Oh, another lovely legal concept that I like that's popped up in the last few years is something called CSI effect. The CSI effect is essentially this. People have watched so many crime drama TV shows that are expecting enormous amounts of evidence in the courtroom, like, oh yeah, enhance that picture, enhance that picture. What do you mean you can't read a social security card through his wallet? They do it on CSI all the time. Come on, just keep enhancing. And the plausible deniability toolkit was something that people tried to develop from a Simple Nomads Mobile Research Center, was not so much to hide stuff or destroy it, but to give you reasons why it might be there. And it's been a while since I looked at that project, but it's all things that would be interesting to look at. Now, there's some tech stuff I want to cover real quick, and it's really hard things to cover in order. You need to understand some things before other things, but which things I should cover first, I'm not really sure. One thing you need to keep in mind, and this is one of the reasons I say that selective file wiping is not really a good secure thing to do, is because Windows jams data in all sorts of places, which we'll talk about here. When we talk about a disk, now this is of course a physical disk, a spinning disk, a magnetic media, solid state storage is going to be entirely different. You may hear of Scott Moulton. Look up Scott Moulton's talk sometimes. He talks about why solid state causes certain forensics issues. But generally, you have your tracks. So I have the label here A. Your geometric sector, track sector. You see, it's like a pi wedge. And D, a cluster, which is these sections that I have that the file system lays out. When you wipe a file, there's something called slack space. Essentially, that's the space. When you allocate a file, you get a certain number of sectors for it. So it's not like if it's a so many byte file, it's exactly that many bytes taken up the disk. A certain amount of extra slack space at the end because you have to give it an entire sector at a time. Well, that slack space gets filled up with something. However, when you overwrite one file with another, let's say I delete one file and put another file over the same clusters, or let's say the same sectors. If it's not the same size, there could be remnants. In this case, I took one file, deleted it, overwrite the same area with a smaller file that wasn't as big, and you can see in this hex editor that I open things up in, that the original file is still in that drive even though I deleted it. Now this area right here is called sometimes RAM slack or residual slack. The reason it's called RAM slack, apparently at one time, when the file system was written out, it would grab stuff from memory and just throw it out there. So you'd actually find pieces of memory on the disk. Now anymore, that's pretty much zeroed out. That goes up to the last sector of that particular file's allocation. It's possible since I don't do forensics for a living that I'm getting a few little factors wrong. So if I am, let me know after the talk. But sorry, this is the residual slack. This is what was left over from the file. This is the RAM slack. The RAM slack, which I said a little bit ago, was no longer RAM. So I told you slightly wrong a second ago. But because one file was deleted, then the area was overwritten by a smaller file, some of the original file is still there. Let's see. One-way hash functions. This is no technical thing to talk about. How many of you all do hash cracking? MD5, for some forensics looks may be okay. It's a hash collision. For passwords, it's completely broken. But essentially, a one-way hash is you take a string and you convert it to a fixed-sized value you can store to a fingerprint or as a signature for that string. In some cases, when someone's looking for contraband, what they're going to do is they're going to hash all the files and search for a known hash. rather than look at all the images. However, if you change just one bit in the what's hashed, you'll get an entirely different value. And the idea behind these hashes is it's really easy to generate the hash, but really hard to figure out what the original input was to get that hash. Oh, a few other things I was talking about. I was talking earlier about hidden partitions. There's ways of hiding stuff on a disk that if you have the right tool, they know how to get, but otherwise they can't see it. I throw these into technical but weak security because if someone knows what to look for it, they're going to find it. And that would be places like the host protected area and disk configure overlay. Sometimes the manufacturer will put the operating system install someplace else so that you can, on the disk, so that you can do a recovery of your entire system if it's hosed. That would be in one of these sorts of areas. And there's a few tools out there for manipulating that, like Oliver Vidstrom put out a tool called Taft for doing it, and I think the Forensics Wiki has more information on the whole concept. I'm not going to be talking about it much because, quite frankly, it's not that secure a way of hiding files. All right. Also, there's all sorts of forensically interesting areas in Windows. I have a whole article on my website of registry keys and places in the file system to look. Nearsoft has a lot of good tools for grabbing data. Like if you ever want a password recovery tool for, I forgot what my password is, but I know I stored it in Firefox. How do I get it back out? Nearsoft's got some great tools for that. And Def Linux, which I haven't played with in a while, so I'm not sure if it's securely active or not, is a forensics toolkit. Think of like what Backtrack is for pen testers. They're trying to aim for being that for forensics examiners. All right, got a little technical stuff behind. Now, so let's actually continue on the meat of the talk. First anti-forensics technique category I want to talk about is don't leave tracks behind in the first place. And this goes into like various web browser, This goes into various web browsers, things like porn mode, or privacy mode, or incognito as they call it. Come on, let's face it, everybody considers it porn mode. Anyway, there's different ways of getting this in different browsers, different shortcut keys. Firefox, Chrome, IE, all these have them. I'm assuming Opera has something similar. I haven't looked at Opera in a while. It's either a keyboard shortcut to get into it. Like I normally use Firefox. So Control-Shift-P and you instantly go into private browsing mode. I don't know of a command line way of doing it, but there is a way to make it automatically launch that way. Then again, my slide here is a few years old, so I need to go looking into it. There might be a way of launching it automatically. In IE, you can do a -private in your shortcut and make it automatically come up in private browsing mode. And Chrome, you can use --incognito. What I normally do is I download the Tor browser bundle. And even if I want to go fast, I don't worry about my network, I just don't want anything on the hard drive. I use Tor browser bundle because by default, it doesn't store anything. Now, some of these I'm not so sure how secure they are. I haven't actually done a test. I'm kind of curious is if you're using one of these private browsing modes, but it has stuff up in memory, but that stuff in memory gets swapped out to your either your or Unix system swap, or let's say out to your cache file, out to your page file. Can someone recover it from there? Sometimes use a data carving tool like PhotoRec on your page file and see all the stuff that comes out. So I'm not sure if they've really done any good countermeasures against that. It's something I need to look at. As far as portable web browsers, I was talking about keeping things separate. Like for instance, let's say someone, I'm trying to do a good example here. There's various JavaScript attacks you can use, or actually I think more accurately, cascade style sheet attacks to tell where someone has been before. One reason to say keep things separate is, well, let's say you web surf around in Google, then all of a sudden you go, hey, I want to switch and use Tor. Okay, I switched to using Tor. Let's say Google had a cross-site request forgery attack, where someone on one web page can force it to make a request on a different web page. Or since you still have your cookies up from Google, they could possibly force a transaction with Google. Now Google implements things to stop this. That's just an example. A better example is, let's say I visit Irongeek.com, and you come to my site, I put a cookie on your machine. And then later on, I'm going to look at some other special stuff on Irongeek.com, but I don't want him to know about it. I'm going to switch to Tor, now I'm going to go back and visit. Your browser is still going to hand me that cookie, so I still know who you are. That's one of the reasons the browser bundle is recommended, because it mitigates various things like that. Tor has its own browser bundle. There's also one out there, Operator for Opera. But just keep in mind, Tor does not equal secure. there was a couple guys who did this. I'm trying to remember the names of everybody who has done this. Anyway, some people have set up their own Tor exit point deliberately just to see what's going through it. And this one guy found like tons and tons of passwords because these people at embassies want to get out of the host country without the traffic being sniffed. Well, Tor would do that for you, but once it got to the exit point, the person could sniff it, and they were using plain text protocols like POP3 for getting their emails. So this guy sat there and collected tons and tons of passwords. Also, I think, I'm trying to think of the gentleman, his name, Moxie Mullen Spike. He did something similar, and I think he used SSL strip, so it automatically would downgrade everybody to HTTP on through his Tor exit point to see all the traffic they could get. So keep in mind, Tor is for anonymity, not just security, and depending on where you're going, if you're visiting your Google account over Tor, but you also visit that Google account over the public internet, it becomes kind of easy to tie you to it. A few other things you might want to check out about darknets. I have a couple talks out there about darknets if you want to read or watch the material I got. IGP is a darknet I like to use a lot just because I like the concept of a totally hidden network where the point is basically a bunch of peers can share stuff without anybody knowing who's actually sharing it. Alright, another way of not leaving tracks in the first place is boot media. Things like Knoppix, which I haven't actually looked at in a while. Ubuntu has a live CD. You can use UNet boot and write this out to a thumb drive. The idea is you boot from one of these, and everything's up in memory, and really once you reboot the machine, everything's gone. If you're interested in using Windows tools, bots.pe will allow you to create a Windows bootable DVD or thumb drive that has your stuff on it. Ultimate Boot CD for Windows is basically bots.pe with a bunch of plugins thrown in. And if you want newer tools, WinBuilder will actually let you strip out the things off of a Windows 7 32 or 64-bit DVD and make a bootable USB or CD. I have whole videos out there on that. I've been using it for like pen test stuff. I like to load that, dual boot it with conboot. You seen conboot? Conboot's nifty. You boot from it, you point it at your drive, say boot machine, it modifies the memory, and you can log in with a blank administrator password. Very slick. The free version at one time didn't support 32-bit, but I know the commercial version does. So it didn't support 64-bit, but I know the commercial version does. But yeah, WinBuilder is really neat if you want to do that kind of thing. But there's an exception to that. If you have certain live Linux CDs and they see swap space on the hard drive, they may use it. So you want to make sure that whatever CD you're using, boot CD you're using, has that option disabled. All right, selective file wiping. For those that don't want to go all the way. There's also tools out there for selectively wiping a file, saying this is this one particular file, I don't like it being there, I want to show you just that file, but I want to leave all my other data alone. These aren't really worth using in my opinion, I'll get into that in a second, but it's an option. There's Clean After Me, which is nifty. You can use it to overwrite various things on your system that you don't want people to know about. It goes into common like registry entries and parts of the file system, like let's say your Internet Explorer cache, and wipes all that stuff out, and you can even do an option of zeroing it out, wiping it all, one time with all zeros. By the way, that is all you need, and I'll cover that more in a second. There's also tools you can use for selectively file wiping, like DD, where you can point at a particular file and just tell it to wipe that entire file. There's also DD for Windows. There's sdelete, which I find kind of interesting. You can selectively delete one particular file with it, but sdelete also adds a registry entry. You know how most of those tools from system internals ask you to say yes to a EULA? Well, it has to remember that somehow. It puts a registry entry in there, so anybody comes along later on knows you used sdelete for something. Eraser is another tool for using that, and the Unix tool Shred. As far as wiping all your slack space on a machine, Windows, since I think Windows 2000 came with a tool called Cypher for doing just that. Basically, it creates a huge freaking file with data in it to fill up all of the space that's not used. And you can set your machine up to automatically defrag the hard drive a couple of times. There's a reason why I say to do that first, and then use Cypher down the entire drive. There's also selective file encryption, like you can say just selectively encrypt this one particular file with EFS. TrueCrypt has that option as well, free off the record. OTFE. And One thing you should keep in mind about encryption, if anybody ever says they have a good encryption algorithm and it's proprietary, that compresses down well, look into it a little bit more. Really, the general rule of thumb is don't implement your own encryption algorithms. But the thing about good encryption, if the encryption was done after, if the encryption was done at the same time as the compression or before the compression, it should not compress down well. Because random data should not compress down well. Now, if they compress it first, then encrypt it, that's a different issue. Alright, reason why relying on selective file wiping is not such a good idea. Windows jams data in all sorts of places, like I said before. Now, you may have got the main file, but what about the temp? Like some programs open up a temporary file to save it just in case the machine crashes or for some other data, or you're getting rid of that. Actually, in modern systems, I didn't even think about this, but volume shadow copy, where things that were bytes that were changed, but now it's kind of recorded, but you can see the previous versions of the file. I'm not sure that always gets rid of all that data either, but even borrowing that, let's say defragging the hard drive, the machine automatically defrags itself. The file was on this section of the disk, it's now on this section of the disk. Page and hibernation files. Your file was up and running at one time, you shut down your laptop, you bring it back up, you may have deleted the file, but what about when it got stored out to the page or hibernation file? Is the data still there? And people use things like data carving to just go down the entire drive or the entire file in the case of a page file and look for certain known file headers and footers and pluck stuff off. Do this sometimes for fun. Go home, take a bunch of photos on your camera, then go on your machine, wipe it, format it, as long as you don't actually say full format in Vista and Newer, because that actually does zero it out. But just delete all the files, then use a tool called PhotoRec and point it at the drive and see how many things it'll get back. Pretty much all the images you had there, unless you start overwriting a lot. But I was mentioning before about defrag issues. Let's say your drive, is this attached? All right. Let's say you had your file here at one time, or you had it here, you had it defragged, and then you move it for the defrag all in one area. Well, these parts of the file are still there. And I've actually done it where I had a file, I defragged it got moved to a different place, I wiped this file, but it only wiped this one, so the original's still there. And that's just an example of how partial wiping is not that useful. Oh, another interesting place to look in the registry is like USB devices. There's various places in the registry to store what USB devices have been plugged into the machine. It would put like vendor ID and product ID, so no idea of what model it is. Also, a lot of times, thumb drives have serial numbers. So someone can look at the serial number and go, oh, okay, this particular thumb drive was plugged in this machine around this time, and they can look that up. Nearsoft has a tool for looking at that kind of information, but it's stored there in the registry on older Windows systems, and I think newer Windows systems put it in the file system. All right, the page file used for swapping memory, I mentioned that a little bit ago. What if your tools you're working on, you may have wiped the file, but it wound up in the page file because it was up in memory at some time when you were editing it. Yeah, that's probably going to be coverable. And of course, those for Linux folks, look at your swap space. Oh, one thing you can do, you can disable the page file, but that might cause system performance issues. And there's also an option that you can set in security options to say to automatically, well, that one's a clear virtual memory page file on shutdown. The problem is that's really slow to shut down your machine, but it's an option. All right, hibernation file. This file is also used like when you put your machine into hibernation mode. It could also have stuff that was up in memory. Now, as far as data carving is concerned, there's a few tools out there. That's a screenshot of PhotoRec. Yeah, it's not as easy to use, but it's still free. You can get it. Disk Digger is pretty cool. You can find old versions of the still freeware version. It's great for getting back images and various other things. But you have to hunt around for the free version. And there's a whole bunch of other data carving tools out there, like Foremost and Scalper, but I haven't used them a whole lot. For just proving the point, these two are pretty good to play around with. And if a friend ever loaned you like a SD card, you want to see what they were taking photos of, and pop in your machine and use one of those. I'm not saying that's a good idea, I'm just saying that's theoretically possible. Not that I've ever done it. Anyway, process monitor. If you're wondering where all a particular application writes data out to, process monitor is great because you can start it up and then point it at the particular exe it's running and and say, okay, show me all the places in the registry and in the file system that this is making edits and writes. Because sometimes you just don't know where it's putting things. Like, you might run into an application, for instance, I know it's storing its password somewhere, but I have no idea where. This might show you where. Registry map is something similar just for registry, and process activity view is also something similar from Nearsoft. The first one was from sysinternals. Alright, that was not leaving tracks. Now those are various things I consider politics. They may be useful sometimes, but mostly fluff, and they're kind of interesting. These are probably going to be useful against people who are like to call solution kiddies. You've heard of script kiddies, but there are various people out there in the forensics world, my understanding, who don't necessarily understand anything at the low level, but just know how to fire a scanner and find the confidential find the data. I mean, the same thing equivalent to run Nessus and send in a Nessus report as a pen test. I'm sure there's people out there in the forensics world who do the exact same thing with in case instead. Think back to the Giulio Mero case, for instance. Read up in the court case on that one, and it's just sad. Also, I guess it depends on what the caseload looks like. Some of the things I'm going to show in this section would probably upset them and cause them to actually come after you. Oh, there's things like timestamp. This is interesting because you can change the, this comes with Metasploit, you can change the times on various files to be something other than what they really happened at. But generally, data I want to cover, I don't care when people know when it was put there, I just don't want it to be there at all. Also, though, there's something interesting. At one time, you could actually set a certain time that would cause, in case, I believe, the crash, which is interesting. You can also set files recursively if you use the for command at the Windows command prompt to automatically set the date to something in the future, in the past, whenever you like. Alternative data streams, you can basically hide a file behind a file. For instance, in this one, I'm hiding a file called myprawn.jpg inside disney.jpg. Hide. That little colon there specifies. By the way, if you ever look at what alternative data streams are actually already on your system, you ever try to double click on exe and say this was downloaded from the internet, are you sure you want to run it? It actually knows that happened recently because there's an alternative data stream that flags that. And when we remove that flag, it removes the alternative data stream. But you can also hide data in it. For instance, if I wanted to open up that JPEG later on, I can use MS Paint, Disney, JPEG, use that colon to reference it, and hide, and pull it back. Now this is going to be hit or miss with file carving, though I'm pretty sure file carving will grab most of these. I have a whole guide out there to using alternative data streams and NTFS to hide stuff, but it's still there and unencrypted on the drive, so it's only a mediocre use for actually hiding data. Steganography is interesting. Steganography is basically hiding stuff in other stuff so it's not found. There's classic examples from this history. The one they always pull out in, professors always pull up in colleges is there was I think it was a Roman who wanted to exchange messages, and he tattooed something on his slave's head, let them grow their hair back out, then sent them away, and when we got to the other place, they shaved the hair off so you get the message out. That seems like an awfully slow way to send the message. A better example might be these wax tablets, where there might be a wooden tablet underneath it. They write something on the wooden tablet, then they cover it in wax, and write something on the wax, and then send it off. That would be another classic example from antiquity. But I'll show a few other examples here in a bit. I have a intro to Stego video out there. There's a few different ways you can do Stego. One would be like tacked on. For instance, an interesting thing about JPEGs and zip files, and by the way, this only works depending on what image viewer and which zip archive opener you use. With zip files, the important stuff is at the end of the file, as far as what files are in it. With JPEGs, the important stuff is in the beginning. So people can hide stuff on a JPEG by tacking on the end. Some people on 4chan would actually distribute files this way. And you can basically use the copy command and copy two files together, put the zip on the end, and you'd have a JPEG that would actually render in most readers, but it would actually have a zip file behind it, so if you renamed it .zip, it would still open. There's also insertive steganography. This would be things like, well, modern day Microsoft Office files are essentially XML put inside of a zip file. If you right-click on that file, rename it .zip, you can open up and you can actually get into it. Now there's some files you actually have to edit, like this is content types in XML. You have to edit to not get messages to let it know that you added data and it didn't, and it won't give an error message when they open it up. And if anybody hits save later on, it actually removes your content. But since it's just a zip file, you can jam files inside of Excel spreadsheets, Word docs, PowerPoints, any kind of Microsoft Office XML-based document. I even have some code on my website for doing it. Then there's like additive, which is kind of cool. And this is the classic example. There's more complex ways of doing this that are more secure. You can encrypt the data before putting it in. In this case, I didn't encrypt the data at all. I just put it in straight. On each one of these, I modified the value of that particular pixel by like 1 or 0, up or down, and by doing that, I modified the last bit of it. And by doing that, I can recover for every 8 pixels, 1 byte of data. So in this particular image, despite the fact this one looks the same as this one, notice that the value here is slightly different. Like this one is 0, 100, 100, and, well, sorry, let me go with this one. 255, all red, 0, 0. This one is 254, 1 green, 0, 0, 0. So there's just slight differences, even though they're not perceptible to the human eye. Notice that slight different value. This is 254 red, this is 255 red. And I think in this case, what I may have done was I actually modified the colors on each. So I could put, every pixel I actually put 3 bits, if I remember how I did this right. So like in this one, I may have encoded 0, 1, 0. But anyway, in this particular bitmap, I encoded the words, I should have been able to hold 37 bytes. That's an example. The human eye doesn't see it, but you can still recover it via software. And there's actually all tools out there for looking for it. Oh, another thing I mentioned as far as silliness you can do, this is probably a really bad idea because it would upset the examiner. You can wipe a file or you can wipe a drive with something more than just all ones, all zeros, or random data. Why not choose something arbitrary? Like, choose an image, whatever image you want off the network. I'm just calling mine lemon white for no apparent reason whatsoever. Lemonly fresh, she's just like a cleaner. The people who are joking, who are laughing right now, are people you probably want to avoid, just to let you know, because they unfortunately run in the same circles I do. But let's say you can find an image that someone might find objectionable. Wipe your entire drive with it. Using these commands, you can essentially repeat that image down the entire thing. So like let's say there's someone out there they really hate Volkswagen Beetles. You can take a picture of a Volkswagen Beetle and write it down the entire drive over and over and over again. Obviously, you'll want to get a little bit more creative than that, but it is possible. However, depending on what you do with it, you're probably going to upset the forensic examiner, and that would probably only encourage him to spend more time, even off clock, trying to get you. Booby-trap devices is an idea I'd like to try out. I've been messing around with programmable HID devices that when you plug them in, they automatically act as keyboards and start sending keystrokes. So even if someone has auto-run turned off, so U-free attacks don't happen against them, pretty much no one has keyboard functionality turned off. Pretty much no one makes it require that an admin has to be there to install the keyboard. So as soon as this gets plugged in, waits a little bit, and it starts sending keystrokes. Yeah, that could be pretty annoying if someone hides that inside of what someone else thought was removable storage. 2 partitions on a thumb drive. Interesting thing about Windows, it only sees the first partition on a thumb drive. It doesn't see the second partition. However, Linux will see that they're both there, and I suppose if you do a data carve down the entire drive, you're still going to get it even in Windows. But it's something to mention. Oh, cloud computing. Some people say, well, I just won't keep the data on my machine at all. I'll keep it someplace else. And I suppose if all you have to worry about is something to physically examine that machine, that is probably a good call. However, my understanding of it, and once again, I'm not a lawyer, there's probably less Fourth Amendment protection against having something in the cloud. It's probably going to take more court work for them to get something off your machine in your house, in your castle, than it will to be to demand from Google that they give you their data. So, from the cloud, it might be a little more secure in the sense that they got to figure out that you have it out there. Once they know where it's at, it's probably easier to get it from the cloud than it is to get it from your home machine from a legal standpoint, at least as I understand the law. Alright, there's also things you can do to attack the forensics tools. Apparently, well, for instance, I had this idea, what if the report goes out as HTML generated reports? Why not try to XSS them? I mean, if someone's reading the report in HTML later on, and let's say it's reporting on all file names, and you find a real convoluted way to actually do an SSS via a file name or a volume name or something else, or via a data card, you know, it's something to look into. No, I haven't looked into it for any forensic purposes. I've been thinking about it from the standpoint of barcodes. Like I scan a barcode, let's say that goes in a web report somehow. Who thinks about filtering the content coming in from a barcode? Why not try SQL injection and XSS via that? Oh, for a while there was actually problems with, and probably still modern problems, this is the older talk, but problems with in-case and sleuth kit people have found weaknesses on. Oh, also, there's a zip file you can download off the internet called 42.zip. I don't know how big it is when you download it. It's like infinitesimally small to download off the network. However, when you try to unzip it, it becomes 4.5 petabytes. That's a lot of bytes. That's a lot of people eating tasty animals. 2 comments on these attacks. Like I said, they'd probably upset the examiner and have them come after you and look in depth. So I'm not saying they're good ideas. I'm just thinking they're interesting from a forensic standpoint. Oh, there's also thermite. Now, originally I said this is completely a bad idea. First of all, from a legal standpoint, it probably is. Complete is destruction of evidence charges. You can't say, yeah, I accidentally thermited my hard drive. So, it also, it's a fire hazard. I would say just use full hard drive encryption and turn the machine off. There's a cold boot attack, but the cold boot attack, ever heard of the cold boot attack? Let's say you use your full hard drive encryption. The encryption key still has to be in memory someplace. So it's up in memory, drive's encrypted. The idea is, okay, we got the drive, and it's still, the machine is up and running, but we want to be able to get stuff off the drive. Let's pull memory out real quick, put it in another box, and suck all the memory off it so we can get the key. And if you do it fast enough and you keep the memory cold, you can pull that off. However, most of the attacks I've read about using that, I mean, it's a very short time window, even with freezing it. So I'm thinking, turn your laptop off, and you can keep it away for this long. You can do the whole like football player thing, running down the field. Yeah, I'm thinking the cold boot attack's not going to happen. But anyway, there actually was a guy at this last ShmooCon who did a great talk on actually making a practical thermite system, where he used like sheetrock, and he had like a 1U server, I think it was, and 1U below it, and 1U above it. I can't remember the exact dimensions. And he actually made something self-contained, didn't cause a lot of smoke, and still totally fried a hard drive. It was actually impressive engineering. And he did it for all relatively cheap, as I recall. Nuke it from orbit, it's the only way to be sure. This is stuff I actually would recommend if you want to wipe stuff. That's like wiping the entire freaking drive. DD is an option. There's DBAN, HDD wipe tools, tons of things out there for doing it. Now, people are talking about this all the time. Is one wipe enough? Depends how much Taco Bell you ate. But one wipe is generally going to be enough as far as wiping data. There's exceptions to that. Here's the deal. Someone did a study on more modern hardware. The Gutman wipe stuff, older drives, this may not necessarily apply. Also, that whole, 35 different ways of wiping was because it had different ways that media can be stored. On a modern drive, one wipe with all zeros or all random is probably going to be enough. Someone did a test on a newer drive. Granted, this data I think comes from like 2008, so it could have changed somehow. I imagine it's only gotten better for people hiding data at this point. But if someone had a pristine drive, the chance to acquire one previous bit correctly after it was written once was 56% on a used drive. So it's just slightly better than 50-50. Well, your chances without doing anything, just randomly guessing, is 50-50. So this is just slightly better than that. But then let's multiply the probabilities out of getting one byte correct. So let's say, oh, by the way, that was on a used drive, 56. I'm sorry, chances were much better on a pristine drive. It was 92% chance. That does sound pretty good. The problem is, let's take that 92% out and multiply it out for an entire byte. You have a 51% chance of getting that byte correct. That's not so good. Then you multiply that out via a whole kilobyte, it becomes infinitesimally small. So one wipe is generally going to be enough. You can argue with some other people who've done research on that if you disagree, or if you have any other newer data, let me know. Now, the one problem with things like DD and so forth, and DBAN by extension, is that it only looks at the file system or the parts of the drive that's allowed to see by the drive. There's something called a bad blocks list. Basically, as your drive goes bad, it marks certain blocks that don't use these things anymore, set them aside. Well, those can still have data on them. And DBAN or DD doesn't know to wipe that. It doesn't even know it's there. So there might be infinitesimally small amounts of data, but it doesn't get gone. It stays there. But there's something that's been added into the smart system on drives since forever. I don't know, I can see early 2000s, called Enhanced Secure Erase. that will actually go down and tell the drive to wipe even that. The problem is that seems to be locked out on most BIOSes. But it will get those bad blocks also. Here's a few tools for doing it, like HDParam, MHDD, and HDD erase. So if you have that option, that's a better one to go with. Full system drive encryption, there's several different options out there. There's BitLocker you can use. I haven't played with it a whole lot. One of the problems with old EFS, I don't remember, well, AES, if I'm reading this right, I assume they haven't updated it. AES cipher block chaining, I think old EFS didn't use cipher block chaining. It used the ECB, yeah, electronic code book. And there's a difference. The major difference with the chaining algorithms is if you always encrypt the same thing, the same way every single time, then you start sending the same message out over and over time. Over time, people can figure that out. Like, let's say at one point, I capture the word attack at dawn, and later on I capture attack at noon. But somehow I figure out the attack at noon one. Well, the first part of that string is still the same. And I go, well, the first one decrypted to attack at noon, or the one I got was attack at dawn, and then this other one's different, except that the last part, the first part's the same. I have a good idea what it might be. So that's one of the reasons you don't want cipher blocks chaining. You do want cipher block chaining modes as opposed to just electronic code book. What cipher block chaining modes do is it takes the first block of the encryption and applies it to the next one to make it slightly different. There's an illustration I have on my website and a video where I encrypt my logo like this. Or if you go out to cipher block chaining on Wikipedia, you can actually look at it and have the Tux Penguin encrypted. And even after you encrypt it, you can still tell it's a Tux Penguin because you can see that the black pixels are still the same black pixels in other areas, since it's a lot of repeated data. However, once they start using cipher block chaining, it looks way different. But anyway, here's a few recommendations for system drive encryption. There's BitLocker, which comes with Windows, though I don't trust Windows to not have a backdoor. I don't know. I don't have any reason to believe it is. There's also TrueCrypt if you don't want to use the Microsoft solution. I think I'd rather have my encryption applied by a third party, so TrueCrypt's another option for doing full hard drive encryption. Also, you might want to look at hard drive encrypted, hardware encrypted like drives. Evotech makes some of those. I think that's one of the companies that Scott Moulton recommended to me a few years ago. How short am I? Okay. All right, we'll keep going then. All right, I have no idea I haven't tested this out a whole lot. Someone told me not a whole lot escapes from this. They supposedly tested it. But what if you made a VM to run all your hidden stuff in and put it inside of an encrypted TrueCrypt volume, and you turned off various options like allow memory auto-scale and main mem use named file, so it wouldn't necessarily put things out on your hard drive other than stuff inside of that encrypted volume you created. I'm like, would that end up in the page file at all, or would that be a fairly secure environment? That needs more testing. The idea is basically you're running a VM from inside a TrueCrypt volume, so hopefully even its page file and even its virtual memory file that VMware saves out when you like close it down and put it in sleep mode, hopefully it's encrypted as well. Other tools to look into, DefLinks, that's another one of those distributions for forensics. FTK Imager, WinHex if you want a hex tool for like looking at drives and seeing what's there and actually doing those demonstrations where you can see, okay, I see he left these bytes here, I put this file here and I overrid it with a smaller file, I can still see the residual slack space. WinHex is, I think, it's part of the tool I used for that screenshot much earlier. There's also some questions I'd like to research into, like how to know when someone's actually ran an anti-forensics tool. I mentioned that sdelete earlier. Sdelete adds this registry key right here, EULA accepted, whenever you run it, so someone knows you've used it. And I think this would be a good idea for a future presentation. I'll just take more time to research it. Also, if someone sees a drive and it's all random or all zeros, they might have a good idea that someone messed around with it. Though that's less true now. All right, at one time, if I remember correctly, in XP, when you said full format, or unless you said, all right, if you even said full format, I believe it did not wipe and zero out everything on the drive. Now in Vista and Newer, it actually does seem to wipe out and zero everything on the drive. Quick format doesn't. But full format, if you like to format a flash drive, in Vista and Newer does zero that information out. So I guess that's not an absolute sign. And also apparently solid state drives do weird things about how they move data around as you're constantly writing to them. But I'm incapable of explaining all that to you, but Scott Moulton has a talk out there on it if you want to Google up Scott Moulton and solid state drives. And hash search for known anti-forensics tools, that might be a thing to look into, but I haven't as of yet. Not to mention those have been updated from time to time. As far as changing the file hash so people don't automatically recognize it, all they're using is tools to find those hashes. I mean, just changing one bit in it's enough to change the hash. Or if someone uses a UPX packer on an exe, that would might likely change it. Then I didn't say I was going to go into anti-malware reverse analysis, but here's a little bit of it. Then there's tools like Shikari with Metasploit to make an executable that is constantly different, so it's really hard to detect. Alright, I had a lot of help on preparing these notes. Scott Moulton gave me some advice as far as forensics was concerned when I was doing my research on this. Check out his website, myharddrivedied.com. Tripp is a buddy of mine. He's a lawyer that, as far as I can tell, does have a soul. He gave me a little bit of guidance. I love Tripp. Tripp is one of those guys who, he has a couple of catchphrases I like. One was, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. And his other was, evidence, get you some. But yeah, he gives great talks. Unfortunately, he generally won't let me record them. Quick announcement. Hopefully some of y'all get to come to DerbyCon, September 27th through the 30th, 2012. Down in Louisville, Kentucky. We usually have a great time, and it's put on by a whole bunch of us. The three main organizers you see up there, all in a big hug. Me, Dave Kennedy, Martin Boss. But of course, we got Nick Hitchcock there and Dave's wife there on the far left. And a whole bunch of other people who volunteer and help us out. Some of the people you'll see around here, because we had a whole bunch of the crew that works with Dave come down and help out with the conference. It was a good time, and hopefully y'all can make it this year. And finally, are there any questions? So I think I've allotted all my time. Any questions? Okay then, I'm gonna go wipe some dries. Thank you. Well, that one I've prepared before, and I've done similar versions to it before. That one is slightly updated for aid.
Hold on. What were you chatting about?
Anti-forensics.
Oh, yeah, the one where you put the smut in the...